What happens when your entire world burns to ash in a single afternoon? When everyone you've ever loved is torn from you in a hail of bullets and arrows? For 22-year-old Sarah Holloway, surviving the Blackwater Pass massacre was only the beginning of her nightmare. Captured by the very outlaws who slaughtered her family, she found herself a prisoner in a camp of killers. But even in the darkest corners of human cruelty, fate has a way of sending the most unexpected saviors. This is the story of a woman who refused to break, a warrior seeking justice, and the bloody path they carved toward freedom. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah Holloway's hands wouldn't stop trembling. 3 weeks had passed since the massacre at Blackwater Pass, but her fingers still shook like autumn leaves in a windstorm. She pressed them flat against the rough wooden table, trying to steady them as Jackson Reed's voice filled the cramped cabin. "You should be grateful, girl." Reed's weathered face twisted into what might have passed for a smile if not for the coldness in his eyes. The outlaw leader ran a hand through his iron-grey hair, regarding her like a curiosity he'd found on the trail. "Most folks don't survive crossing paths with the Blackwater boys. You're special. Special." The word made bile rise in Sarah's throat. There was nothing special about being the lone survivor of a wagon train massacre. Nothing special about watching her father fall with 3 arrows in his chest, her mother's screams cut short by a bullet, her little brother Timothy dragged from the wagon, and Sarah forced the memories down, locking them away in that dark place she'd created inside herself, the place where she kept the screams, the blood, the smoke. "I didn't ask to be spared," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Reed laughed, the sound like rocks grinding together. "No, you sure didn't, but Matthews saw something in you." He stepped closer, his shadow falling across her face. "Said it'd be a waste to kill a pretty thing like you." Sarah's stomach twisted. Frank Matthews, the outlaw who'd pulled her from beneath her family's burning wagon, who'd thrown her over his horse like a sack of grain, while the rest of the Blackwater boys finished their butchery. The man who'd convinced Reed to keep her alive, though she sometimes wondered if death would have been kinder. The cabin door swung open with a groan of rusted hinges. Matthews himself stepped inside, bringing with him the smell of horses, whiskey, and gun oil. His face was handsome in a harsh sort of way, all sharp angles and permanent sneer. At 35, he was the youngest of Reed's lieutenants and the most dangerous. "Talking about me?" Matthews grinned, revealing a gold tooth that caught the lantern light. "My ears were burning." Reed stepped back, gesturing between them with mock formality. "Just explaining to Miss Holloway here about her good fortune." Matthews's gaze slid over Sarah like a physical touch, making her skin crawl. "Fortune's about to improve, too." He tossed a bundle onto the table. It landed with a soft thud, fabric spilling out. A dress, Sarah realized. Blue calico with small pearl buttons. "Put that on. We're having a celebration tonight." Sarah stared at the dress, confusion and dread mixing in her chest. "Celebration." Reed's smile widened. "Frank here has decided it's time you became a proper member of our family." "What?" The word fell from Sarah's lips, though she already knew. She'd seen the way Matthews watched her, the way he'd been circling closer these past weeks. "You're to be married," Reed announced, as casually as if discussing the weather. "Tonight. To Frank." The world tilted beneath Sarah's feet. Marriage to one of the men who'd murdered her family, one of the butchers of Blackwater Pass, her hands curled into fists beneath the table. "No." The word was quiet, but firm. Reed's eyebrows rose. "No? I won't marry him." Sarah forced herself to meet Reed's gaze, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "I'd rather die." The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. Then Matthews laughed, the sound lacking any warmth or humor. "Ain't asking, darling." He leaned against the doorframe, thumbs hooked in his belt. "Reed here is something of a man of God, believes in doing things properly, but with or without words said over us. You're mine now." Sarah's eyes darted to the door, then the window. Both were blocked. She was trapped, just as she'd been since the day of the massacre. The cabin walls seemed to close in, the air growing thin. She couldn't breathe. Reed clicked his tongue like he was scolding a child. "Now, Sarah, Frank saved your life. Man deserves something in return, don't you think?" "He killed my family," Sarah whispered, the words torn from somewhere deep inside. "All of you did." Matthews shrugged, unmoved by her accusation. "Business, nothing personal about it." Sarah lunged from her chair, fingers curled like claws, aiming for Matthews' smug face. She never made it. Reed caught her around the waist, his grip like iron despite his 60 years. "That's enough," he barked, shoving her back. "You'll do as you're told, girl. Put on the dress and be at the fire circle by sundown." His voice dropped lower. "Or I'll let the boys have their way with you before putting a bullet in your head. Understood?" Sarah's breath came in sharp gasps. She'd seen what these men were capable of. Reed wasn't bluffing. "Understood," she forced out between clenched teeth. Reed nodded, satisfied. "Good. Glad we settled that." He turned to Matthews. "She's all yours, Frank. Try not to bruise her too bad before the ceremony." Matthews grinned, that gold tooth flashing again. "No promises." When they left, closing the door behind them, Sarah sank to the floor. Her legs wouldn't hold her anymore. Outside, she could hear the camp coming to life as evening approached. Men laughing, bottles clinking, someone tuning a battered fiddle. They were preparing for a celebration. Her wedding. The Blue Hollow outlaw camp sprawled across a hidden valley in the Dakota Territory, too far from any settlement for Sarah to flee, even if she managed to escape. 20 cabins and tents arranged in a rough circle around a central fire pit, home to the most notorious gang west of the Mississippi. The Blackwater Boys, they called themselves, though most were old enough to be her father. Sarah pulled herself up, moving to the small, cracked mirror hanging on the wall. Her reflection startled her, as it always did these days. She barely recognized herself. Her once full cheeks had hollowed, and her blue eyes seemed too large for her face, haunted by shadows that never left. Her chestnut hair hung limp around her shoulders, unwashed and tangled. She pressed her palm against the glass, as if trying to reach that other Sarah, the one who had laughed easily, who had dreamed of California, who had sat beside her brother on the wagon seat and pointed out shapes in the clouds. That Sarah was gone, buried somewhere along Blackwater Pass with her family. The dress Matthews had brought lay on the table like a snake coiled to strike. Sarah approached it cautiously, running her fingers over the fabric. It was finer than anything she'd worn since leaving Missouri. Where had he gotten it? She refused to think about the likely answer. Another wagon, another family, another massacre. Slowly, she undressed, the rough cabin walls offering little protection from the cooling evening air. The dress fit well enough, though it hung loose. Around her waist, she'd lost weight these past weeks, surviving on whatever scraps Reed's men threw her way. The color brought out the blue in her eyes, just as her mother had always said, no. She couldn't think about her mother now. Couldn't remember the way Ellen Holloway had hummed as she mended clothes by the fire, how she'd kissed Sarah's forehead each night before bed, even at 22. Those memories would break her, and Sarah couldn't afford to break. Not yet. A knock at the door startled her. Before she could respond, it swung open, revealing Maggie Weathers, the only other woman in the camp. 60 if she was a day, with a face like tanned leather and eyes that had seen too much. Maggie served as cook and laundress for the Blackwater Boys. She wasn't a prisoner like Sarah, but something told Sarah that Maggie's story wasn't so different from her own, just older, the edges worn smooth by time. "They sent me to help you get ready," Maggie said, her voice gravelly from years of cheap whiskey and harsh weather. She carried a small bundle under one arm. Thought you might want another woman's hands for your hair. Sarah said nothing, but she didn't resist when Maggie guided her to the room's only chair. The older woman's fingers were gentle as they worked through the tangles in Sarah's hair, a stark contrast to the roughness of her appearance. "Did you eat today?" Maggie asked, her tone casual. Sarah shook her head. Maggie clicked her tongue, reaching into her bundle to produce a piece of cornbread wrapped in a cloth. "Eat this. Man like Matthews, you'll need your strength." The implied warning hung in the air between them. Sarah took the bread, forcing herself to take small bites, though her stomach clenched around the food. "How long have you been with them?" Sarah asked after a moment, breaking the silence. Maggie's hands paused briefly in her hair. 15 years, since my Albert was killed and my ranch burned." Her voice remained matter-of-fact, but Sarah felt the weight of untold suffering in those few words. "You never tried to leave?" A bitter laugh escaped Maggie's lips. "First few years I tried, got the scars to prove it." She resumed her work, twisting Sarah's hair into a simple but elegant style. After a while, survival becomes its own purpose. "You understand?" Sarah didn't answer. She couldn't imagine 15 years in this hell. She wouldn't last 15 days more without losing what remained of her soul. "There," Maggie said finally, stepping back to admire her work. "You look beautiful." "Child!" Sarah met her eyes in the mirror. "I look like a corpse in a pretty dress." Maggie didn't argue. Instead, she reached into her bundle again and pulled out something small, pressing it into Sarah's palm. "Hide this in your skirts, just in case." Sarah glanced down. A small knife, its blade no longer than her middle finger, but sharp enough to catch the dying light from the window. "Maggie, just in case," the older woman repeated, her eyes hard now. "A woman should always have options." Before Sarah could thank her, the door burst open again. Two of Reed's men stood in the threshold, rifles in hand. "Time to go," the taller one said. "Everyone's waiting." Sarah slipped the knife into a fold of her skirt, heart pounding. Maggie squeezed her arm once, a silent gesture of solidarity before backing away. The outlaw camp had transformed in the hours Sarah had spent in the cabin. Lanterns hung from posts around the central fire pit, casting golden light over the gathered men. Someone had arranged logs in a rough semicircular for seating, and bottles of whiskey passed freely from hand to hand. In the center, Reed stood with an old leather-bound Bible in his hands, Matthews beside him in a clean shirt and vest. A hush fell over the crowd as Sarah was led forward. She felt their eyes on her. 30 men, all killers and thieves, and fought the urge to run. There was nowhere to run to. Matthews grinned when he saw her, that gold tooth catching the firelight. "Don't you clean up nice?" he drawled, reaching for her hand. Sarah flinched away from his touch, earning herself a warning glare from Reed. The message was clear: behave or else. She allowed Matthews to take her hand, though every instinct screamed at her to pull away. "Brothers," Reed called out, his voice carrying across the camp, "we gather tonight to witness the joining of our own Frank Matthews to Miss Sarah Holloway." A cheer went up from the gathered outlaws, punctuated by crude jokes and laughter. Sarah scanned their faces, recognizing each one from that terrible day at Blackwater Pass. The man with the red beard who'd shot the Ellis family's teenage son, the one-eyed outlaw who'd dragged Mrs. Peterson from her wagon, the twins who'd set fire to the wagons with families still inside. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Monsters, all of them, and she was being given to one as a prize. "Marriage is a sacred bond," Reed continued, thumbing through the Bible with exaggerated care. "A covenant not to be entered into lightly." The hypocrisy of his words made Sarah's Stomach turn. There was nothing sacred about this mockery of a ceremony. Frank Matthews, do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? Reed asked, his tone suggesting the outcome was a foregone conclusion. Matthews' grip tightened on Sarah's hand. I sure do. Reed turned to Sarah, his cold eyes boring into hers. And do you, Sarah Holloway, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? The camp fell silent, all eyes on her. Sarah's throat closed, the word no lodged somewhere between her heart and lips. She felt the small knife pressing against her thigh through the fabric of her dress. A woman should always have options, Maggie had said, but what options did she truly have? If she refused, Reed would make good on his promise. If she tried to fight, she would die, and likely not quickly. The only path forward, the only chance of survival was through this nightmare. She began, but was cut off by a commotion at the edge of the camp. "Riders coming!" someone shouted from the darkness beyond the lantern's glow. 4, maybe 5! Reed snapped the Bible shut, his preacher's demeanor vanishing in an instant. "Nobody's expected," he growled, reaching for the revolver at his hip. "Matthews, Taylor, with me. The rest of you positions." The wedding party dissolved into controlled chaos as the outlaws scrambled for weapons. Matthews released Sarah's hand, shoving her toward Maggie. "Get her back to the cabin," he ordered, "and stay there until I come for you." Sarah allowed herself to be pulled away, her mind racing. Riders at night could mean many things. A rival gang, perhaps, or lawmen who'd somehow tracked the Blackwater boys to their hideout. Either way, it meant chaos, and chaos might be her only chance. As Maggie hurried her back toward the cabin, Sarah glanced over her shoulder. Beyond the circle of lantern light, shadows moved in the trees surrounding the camp. The hair on the back of her neck stood up. Something about those shadows seemed wrong, too fluid, too purposeful to be just men on horseback. A flash of movement caught her eye, a figure darting between trees, low to the ground. Not an outlaw. Someone else. Then she saw him, just for an instant as he passed through a patch of moonlight. A tall silhouette, hair in twin braids, a rifle in his hands. Not a white man. A single thought crystallized in Sarah's mind with perfect clarity. Something was about to happen, something terrible. And in the midst of that terror might lie her only chance for freedom. The first gunshot split the night like thunder, and the blue hollow camp erupted into fire and blood. The night exploded into chaos around Sarah. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions at once, muzzle flashes illuminating the darkness like lightning strikes. Maggie's grip on her arm tightened painfully as they ducked behind a woodpile, the older woman's breath coming in frightened gasps. "Sweet Jesus," Maggie whispered. "This ain't no ordinary raid." Sarah peered around the edge of the woodpile. The outlaws had scattered into defensive positions, firing blindly into the surrounding forest. But their attackers remained invisible, striking from the shadows and vanishing again like ghosts. "They're everywhere!" one of the Blackwater boys shouted before a bullet caught him in the chest, throwing him backward into the fire pit. His screams added to the cacophony as flames consumed his clothing. Reed stood in the center of the camp, barking orders that went mostly unheeded in the confusion. "Form a line, damn you all. Matthews, get the horses. Taylor, check the north ridge." As if in answer to Reed's commands, a blood-curdling war cry split the night. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, sending shivers down Sarah's spine. She'd heard stories of such sounds from travelers heading west. The battle cry of Plains warriors, Sioux, Maggie breathed, crossing herself. God help us all. A flaming arrow arced through the night sky, landing with terrible precision on the roof of the nearest cabin. Within seconds, the dry timber caught, flames licking upward toward the stars. Another arrow followed, then another, until half the camp structures blazed like torches. In the firelight, Sarah caught glimpses of their attackers, shadows moving with deadly purpose between trees and boulders. Most were mounted, guiding their horses with their knees while wielding rifles and bows with lethal efficiency. She counted at least 8 warriors, their faces streaked with paint, feathers adorning their braided hair. One figure in particular drew her eye, a warrior on a paint stallion who seemed to direct the others. He was taller than his companions, his bare chest covered by a breastplate of bone and beads that gleamed in the firelight. A single eagle feather stood upright in his hair, and even from a distance, Sarah could feel the intensity of his gaze as he surveyed the chaos he had unleashed. "We need to go," Sarah hissed, tugging at Maggie's sleeve. "Now, while everyone's distracted." The older woman shook her head. "Where? There's nothing but wilderness for 50 miles in every direction. Anywhere is better than here." Sarah spotted a gap in the fighting near the horse corral. "Come with me, Maggie, please." For a moment, indecision warred on Maggie's weathered face. Then she squared her shoulders. "Too old to run, child. You go. Head north, follow the creek. Might reach Fort Hayes in 3 days if you're lucky." Before Sarah could argue, the decision was made for them. Frank Matthews appeared through the smoke, blood streaming from a gash across his forehead, his eyes wild with rage and fear. "There you are," he snarled, lunging for Sarah. His fingers tangled in her carefully arranged hair, yanking her head back painfully. "You're coming with me. Let her go." Maggie shouted, swinging a piece of firewood at Matthew's head. The blow connected with a sickening crack, but it only staggered the outlaw. With a roar of fury, he backhanded Maggie, sending the older woman sprawling into the dirt. "No!" Sarah screamed, clawing at Matthew's arms. Her fingers found the small knife hidden in her skirts, and without thinking, she drew it and slashed wildly. The blade caught Matthews across the cheek, opening a thin line that immediately welled with blood. He howled, more in shock than pain, his grip loosening just enough for Sarah to tear herself free. "You little bitch," he growled, touching his bleeding face. "I'm going to make you regret that." Sarah backed away, knife held before her in trembling hands. Matthews advanced slowly, like a wolf stalking wounded prey. Behind him, the battle raged on. But in this small bubble of space between burning buildings, it was just the two of them. "Nobody's coming to save you," Matthews said, drawing his hunting knife, a blade 10 times the size of Sarah's pitiful weapon. "Might as well make this easy on yourself." Sarah's back hit a wall. Nowhere left to run. She thought of her family, cut down at Blackwater Pass, of her little brother Timothy's face as he called her name one last time. She wouldn't die cowering like a frightened rabbit. "Come and get me then," she spat, raising her chin in defiance. Matthews, mouth twisted into an ugly smile. "That's more like it. Got some fire after all." He lunged forward. Sarah ducked, slashing upward with her small blade, catching nothing but air as Matthews sidestepped. His fist connected with her jaw, sending her sprawling. Stars exploded behind her eyes as her head struck the hard-packed earth. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard Matthews laughing. "That's enough playing," he said, kneeling beside her, pinning her arms with his knees. The weight of him crushed the breath from her lungs. "Time to go." Sarah bucked and twisted, but his strength was overwhelming. The knife had fallen from her grasp, lying just beyond her reach. Matthews raised his own blade, pressing the flat of it against her cheek. "Be still," he hissed, "or I start taking pieces." A shadow fell across them both. Matthews had just enough, time to look up before a tomahawk buried itself in his shoulder with a meaty thunk. The outlaw's scream echoed across the burning camp as he rolled off Sarah, clutching at the weapon embedded in his flesh. Blood poured between his fingers, staining the blue calico dress Sarah wore. Standing above them both was the warrior with the eagle feather. Up close, he was even more imposing, over 6 feet tall with broad shoulders and arms corded with muscle. His face was stern, high cheekbones accentuated by red and black war paint. But it was his eyes that captured Sarah's attention, dark and intelligent, assessing her with unnerving intensity. Matthews struggled to his feet, cursing as he yanked the tomahawk from his shoulder. Blood soaked his shirt, but fury gave him strength. He charged the warrior with a bestial roar, knife aimed at the taller man's heart. The Sioux warrior sidestepped with fluid grace, catching Matthews' wrist and twisting until bones cracked. The outlaw's knife fell to the ground. In the same motion, the warrior drove his knee into Matthews' stomach, doubling him over, then brought an elbow down on the back of his neck. Matthews crumpled like a marionette with cut strings, face down in the dirt. For a heartbeat, Sarah and the warrior stared at each other across the fallen outlaw's body. Neither moved, neither spoke. Around them, the battle was turning into a massacre as the outlaws, outmaneuvered and surrounded, fell one by one to the coordinated assault. The warrior's eyes narrowed slightly as he studied her, taking in the fine dress splattered with blood, her bruised face, the terror and defiance warring in her expression. Whatever he saw seemed to satisfy him, for he made a quick decision, stepping forward and extending his hand. Sarah hesitated. This man was as dangerous as any she had ever encountered. Perhaps more so. She had seen the bodies of settlers killed in tribal raids, had heard the whispered stories of torture and captivity, but she had also seen the brutality of men like Matthews and Reed. At least the warrior before her had intervened when he could have simply let her die. She placed her, his hand in his. In one smooth motion, he pulled her to her feet, then gestured urgently toward the edge of camp where the horses were kept. His meaning was clear. They needed to leave, now. A shout from behind them confirmed the wisdom of his plan. Reed stood 20 yards away, rifle raised to his shoulder, aiming directly at them. "Matthews!" he bellowed. "Get away from her!" The warrior reacted instantly, shoving Sarah behind him as Reed fired. The bullet whispered past Sarah's ear close enough that she felt its passage like a kiss of air. The warrior didn't flinch, drawing a knife from his belt and flinging it in a single fluid motion. The blade caught Reed in the upper chest, just below his collarbone. The outlaw leader staggered backward, dropping his rifle to clutch at the handle. Protruding from his flesh, "Run," the warrior said to Sarah, his English accented but clear. She didn't need to be told twice. Together they sprinted toward the horse corral, dodging between burning buildings and running outlaws. Twice they encountered Blackwater boys trying to flee. Twice the warrior dispatched them with brutal efficiency, never breaking stride. At the corral, most of the horses had already broken free, spooked by the gunfire and flames. Only 3 remained, the warrior's paint stallion still obediently waiting where he'd been left, and 2 of the outlaws' mounts, wide-eyed with fear, but held in place by their tethers. The warrior vaulted onto his stallion's back in a single, graceful motion, then reached down for Sarah. She grasped his forearm, allowing herself to be pulled up behind him. The horse snorted beneath their combined weight, but stood steady. "Hold tight," the warrior instructed, guiding her arms around his waist. Sarah had barely secured her grip before the stallion leapt forward, powerful muscles bunching beneath them as it charged through the burning camp. She pressed her face against the warrior's back, eyes squeezed shut against the heat and smoke. The solid warmth of him was the only stable thing in a world gone mad. They burst from the camp like spirits escaping hell, the stallion's hooves thundering across the open ground. Beyond. Behind them, Blue Hollow burned against the night sky, orange flames licking upward as if trying to consume the stars themselves. The warrior guided his horse into the forest, where 7 other mounted Sioux warriors waited. They called out to him in their language, voices urgent. Sarah couldn't understand the words, but their meaning was clear enough. "Hurry, danger follows." The warrior replied with sharp commands, gesturing first at Sarah, then back toward the burning camp. Whatever he said caused a stir among his companions. One, wearing a headdress of multiple feathers, argued vehemently, pointing at Sarah with obvious disapproval. She shrank against the warrior's back, suddenly aware of how precarious her position was. She had escaped one form of captivity only to potentially face another. The argument ended abruptly when a rifle shot cracked through the night. One of the warriors jerked in his saddle, clutching his arm where the bullet had grazed him. From the burning camp, a group of mounted outlaws emerged, the survivors of the raid, led by a bloodied but still dangerous Jackson Reed. "There they are!" Reed's voice carried through the trees. "Get the girl!" The warrior with the eagle feather barked another command, and as one, the Sioux band wheeled their horses and thundered deeper into the forest. Sarah clung desperately to her rescuer as branches whipped past, threatening to unseat her with every stride. The forest blurred around them, moonlight filtering through the canopy in brief silver flashes. Sarah had never ridden so fast in her life. The stallion moved like a creature born of wind and shadow, its stride never faltering despite the uneven ground and the weight of two riders. Behind them, she could hear the outlaws in pursuit, crashing through the underbrush with none of the Sioux warriors' finesse. Reed was shouting orders, his voice growing fainter as the distance between them increased. For what seemed like hours, they rode at breakneck pace, fording streams and scaling rocky inclines that would have daunted lesser horsemen. The warrior never spoke, all his concentration focused on guiding his mount through the treacherous terrain. Finally, as false dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, he signaled for his companions to halt in a small clearing surrounded by tall pines. The warriors dismounted, immediately setting to various tasks with practiced efficiency, checking their horses, tending to the wounded warrior, scanning the forest for signs of pursuit. The eagle-feathered warrior slid from his stallions back, then reached up to help Sarah dismount. Her legs buckled as soon as her feet touched the ground, numb from hours of riding. He caught her before she could fall, his grip firm but not painful. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice rough from smoke and exhaustion. He nodded once, then guided her to a fallen log where she could sit. Sarah sank down gratefully, every muscle in her body protesting the night's exertions. Now that the immediate danger had passed, reaction set in. She began to tremble, fine shivers that ran from her head. To her feet, the warrior noticed. Without a word, he removed a small deerskin from his saddlebag and draped it around her shoulders. The hide was soft and warm, smelling faintly of cedar smoke and horse. "My name is Sarah Holloway," she said, clutching the deerskin around her. It seemed important that he knew who she was, that she was a person with a name, and not just a captive, to be traded or used. The warrior studied her for a long moment before responding. "Swift Elk," he said finally, touching his chest, "of the Hunkpapa Sioux." It was the first full sentence he had spoken to her, and Sarah was struck by the deep, resonant quality of his voice, despite his accented English. "Why did you help me?" she asked. Swift Elk's expression remained impassive. "The blue-coat soldiers at Fort Hays say Blackwater boys took white woman prisoner. Chief Heavy Shield's son was killed at river crossing by these men 2 moons ago. We come for revenge." He paused. "Finding you was not planned." Sarah absorbed this. Not a rescue mission then, but a raid of vengeance. She had been saved by happenstance, not design. "Will you take me to Fort Hays?" she asked. Before Swift Elk could answer, the warrior with the multiple feathered headdress approached, speaking rapidly in Sioux. His tone was clearly disapproving as he gestured toward Sarah, then in the direction they had come from. Swift Elk responded calmly but firmly, his posture subtly shifting to place himself between Sarah and the other warrior. The conversation grew heated, other warriors gathering around to listen or occasionally interject. Sarah watched anxiously, understanding nothing of the words, but recognizing the universal language of disagreement. She was the subject of their argument, that much was clear, and her fate hung in the balance. Finally, Swift Elk said something that silenced the others. The warrior with the headdress glared at Sarah once more, then stalked away, muttering under his breath. "What was that about?" Sarah asked when Swift Elk returned to her side. "Black Wolf says you bring danger," he explained, kneeling to check her bruised jaw with surprisingly gentle fingers. "Says Outlaws will follow because of you. Says we should leave you." Sarah's heart sank. "And what do you say?" Swift Elk's dark eyes met hers. "I say leaving a defenseless woman to die is not the Sioux way," he straightened. "But Black Wolf is right about danger. Reed and his men will hunt you. Hunt us." "I'm sorry," Sarah whispered, guilt washing over her. These men had their own mission, their own purpose. Her presence complicated everything. Swift Elk shook his head. "Not your fault. War between your people and mine is an old story. You are," he seemed to search for the right word, "unexpected chapter." From the edge of the clearing, one of the younger warriors called out, pointing to the east. Swift Elk tensed, listening to whatever report was being delivered. "Riders," he told Sarah grimly. "Still following." "Reed," Sarah breathed, fear coursing through her anew. The outlaw leader was not a man to admit defeat easily, especially when his pride was at stake. Swift Elk nodded. "He wants you back." It wasn't a question. Yes. Sarah's fingers found the knife Maggie had given her, still miraculously tucked in her skirts. "But I won't go. I'd rather die fighting." Something like approval flickered in Swift Elk's eyes. "No, need to die today." He offered her his hand once more. "Come, I know places they cannot follow." As dawn broke over the Dakota wilderness, Sarah took the hand of a warrior whose people had been enemies of her own for generations. In that moment, old hatred seemed insignificant compared to the bond forged in blood and fire. Behind them, Jackson. Reed and his remaining men closed the distance, driven by rage and wounded pride. Ahead lay unknown dangers and an uncertain alliance with a man who should have been her enemy. But for the first time since watching her family die at Blackwater Pass, Sarah felt something other than despair. It took her a moment to recognize the unfamiliar sensation warming her chest. Hope. The forest grew denser as Swift Elk led the Sioux warriors deeper into territory few white settlers had ever seen. Sarah's thighs burned from hours in the saddle, her hands raw from gripping the warrior's waist. The blue calico dress Matthews had given her was torn at the hem, splattered with blood and soot, a grotesque reminder of all she had endured. "How much further?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the rhythmic pounding of hooves against earth. Swift Elk glanced over his shoulder. 2 hours to Medicine Rocks. Safe there? Sarah didn't ask why. She had surrendered herself to this strange journey, to the wisdom of a man whose people she had been taught to fear. The irony wasn't lost on her, seeking protection from those of her own kind, labeled savages, fleeing men who claimed the mantle of civilization. The warriors rode in a loose formation, 2 scouts ranging ahead, the others flanking Swift Elk. And Sarah, Black Wolf, kept his distance, his disapproval evident in every glance he cast their way. The wounded warrior, whose name Sarah learned was Running Fox, rode stoically despite the crude bandage wrapped around his arm where Reed's bullet had grazed him. They paused briefly at midday to water the horses at a narrow stream cutting through a rocky gorge. Sarah slid from the stallion's back, legs buckling as they hit the ground. Swift Elk steadied her with a hand on her elbow, then moved to check his horse, leaving her alone for the first time since their escape. Sarah knelt by the stream, cupping her hands to drink. The water was cold and clear, soothing her parched throat. She caught her reflection in the rippling surface. A stranger stared back, hair wild, face smudged with soot and speckled with dried blood, eyes haunted by horrors no one should witness. "Here," she, startled at the voice, looking up to find a young warrior, hardly more than a boy, offering her a strip of dried meat. He couldn't have been more than 16, his face unlined, war paint smeared by sweat and exertion. "Thank you," Sarah said, accepting the jerky with a grateful nod. The boy watched her curiously as she tore into the tough meat with her teeth. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until food was before her. "I am Little Hawk," he said in careful English. "Swift Elk says you fought an outlaw with a knife." He mimed a slashing motion, admiration clear in his young face. Sarah swallowed hard. "I didn't do much damage." Little Hawk grinned, revealing a chipped front tooth. "Courage not measured by wounds given." He tapped his chest. "Measured here." Before Sarah could respond, Black Wolf barked a command from across the stream. Little Hawk's smile vanished, replaced by a respectful but wary expression as he hurried away. Swift Elk approached, carrying a water skin. "Drink," he said, offering it to her. "Water here is not good for the stomach." Sarah accepted the skin, taking a careful sip. The water had been mixed with something, herbs perhaps, that gave it a slightly bitter taste. "What did Black Wolf say to Little Hawk?" she asked. Swift Elk's expression remained neutral. "He says young warriors should not speak with white women. Says your words carry sickness that weakens Sioux hearts. He really hates me, not you." Swift Elk tucked the water skin away. "What you represent? Black Wolf lost wife, 2 children to blue-coat soldiers last winter. Fever came to our camp after they forced us to new hunting grounds." His dark eyes met hers. "Hate has deep roots, Sarah." He thought of her own hatred for the Blackwater boys, the cold satisfaction she'd felt watching Matthews fall, Reed clutching at the knife in his chest. She understood the roots of hate all too well. "Why are you different?" she asked. "Why help me when he would leave me?" Swift Elk was silent for a long moment, his gaze distant. "My father is Chief Heavy Shield. He teaches that path of hatred, leads only to more graves." He adjusted the eagle feather in his hair. "I have seen enough graves." A sharp whistle cut through the air, one of the scouts signaling from a ridge above. Swift Elk tensed, scanning the horizon. "They found our trail," he said grimly. "Mount up." The brief rest ended as abruptly as it had begun. Sarah was lifted onto the paint stallion once more, her body protesting every movement. Swift Elk swung up behind her, reversing their previous positions so that she sat before him, his arms encircling her as he took the reins. "Safer this way," he explained, when she gave him a questioning look. "You fall, I catch." The warriors thundered away from the stream, following a narrow game trail that twisted upward through increasingly rocky terrain. The horses labored against the steep incline, sweat darkening their coats. Behind them, distant but unmistakable, came the sounds of pursuit, shouts, and the crack of a rifle shot. "They're getting closer," Sarah said, anxiously tightening her chest. Swift Elk nodded, expression grim. "Reed knows these lands better than I thought." The trail narrowed further, forcing the warriors to ride single file along a treacherous ridge. To their right rose a sheer cliff face. To their left, a dizzying drop to jagged rocks, hundreds of feet below. Sarah fixed her eyes straight ahead, focusing on the stallion's ears rather than the fatal fall that awaited one misstep. A rifle shot echoed against the cliff. Closer now. The last warrior in line, a stoic, middle-aged man called Stone Hand, twisted in his saddle to return fire with a Winchester repeater, providing cover as they navigated the dangerous pass. There, Swift Elk pointed ahead to where the ridge widened into a plateau dotted with strange, towering rock formations, natural pillars and arches carved by wind and rain over countless centuries. Medicine Rocks. Even in their desperate flight, Sarah couldn't help but marvel at the sight. Dozens of stone columns rose from the earth like the spine of some enormous buried creature, some standing alone, others connected by natural bridges of weathered sandstone. Many bore ancient paintings, handprints, animal figures, spiraling patterns in faded ochre and white. "Sacred place," Swift Elk said as they plunged into the maze of stone. Old magic here. The warriors dispersed among the rocks with practiced efficiency, communicating through whistles and hand signals. Stonehand and another warrior took up positions at the entrance to the stone labyrinth, rifles ready. Swift Elk guided his stallion deeper into the formation, following what appeared to be a game trail, but revealed itself as an ancient path, worn by generations of feet. The air grew cooler as shadow engulfed them, stone walls rising on either side. "Where are we going?" Sarah asked, voice hushed in the sudden quiet. "Place of ancestors," Swift Elk replied. "Cave where spirits dwell. Whites fear such places." They rounded a corner, and Sarah gasped. Before them stood the largest of the stone formations, a massive natural arch nearly 60 feet high, its surface covered in painted symbols that seemed to shift and dance in the dappled sunlight. Beneath the arch, a dark opening led into the heart of the plateau itself. Swift Elk dismounted, then helped Sarah down. Her legs trembled beneath her, muscles cramped from the long ride. He steadied her with a hand at her elbow, then led the stallion to a small pool of water that had collected in a natural basin nearby. "Rest," he instructed, gesturing to a flat rock in the shade of the arch. "I go help others." Sarah sank onto the stone gratefully, watching as Swift Elk disappeared back the way they had come, moving with fluid grace despite hours in the saddle. Left alone, she took stock of her situation. For the first time since fleeing Blue Hollow, she was miles from any settlement in the company of Sioux warriors, being hunted by outlaws who would kill her as soon as she saw her. She had no supplies, no weapons save the small knife still hidden in her skirts, and no clear plan beyond immediate survival. And yet, she felt more alive than she had since the massacre at Blackwater Pass. The crushing weight of helplessness that had suffocated her during her captivity had lifted. Here, in this ancient place of stone and shadow, she could breathe again. A soft sound drew her attention to the cave mouth. She tensed, rising to her feet, hand going to her hidden knife. A figure emerged from the darkness, not Swift Elk, but a woman. She was elderly, her copper skin deeply lined, her silver hair bound in 2 long braids that reached her waist. She wore a deerskin dress decorated with intricate beadwork and carried a gnarled walking stick topped with feathers and small animal bones. The old woman stopped several paces away, studying Sarah with piercing black eyes that missed nothing. After a long moment she spoke, not in English, but in the flowing syllables of the Sioux language. I don't understand," Sarah said hesitantly. The old woman clicked her tongue impatiently, then switched to heavily accented but comprehensible English. "I say you bring storms to my grandson's path." "Your grandson?" Swift Elk. The old woman pointed her stick at Sarah. "Son of my daughter, son of Chief Heavy Shield." She thumped the stick against the ground. "I am Singing Bird. This place is my home now." Sarah dipped her head respectfully. "I'm Sarah Holloway. I didn't mean to bring trouble to your grandson." Singing Bird made a sound somewhere between a snort and a laugh. "Trouble finding him without help. Always has. Boy born under a changing moon." She hobbled closer, squinting at Sarah's face. "You have death marks on you." "Death marks?" The old woman traced gnarled fingers across her own face, mirroring the spots where Sarah knew blood had dried on her skin. "Those who die, their blood marks you, claim you." She nodded to herself. "Many deaths follow you." A chill ran down Sarah's spine despite the afternoon heat. Before she could respond, Swift Elk returned, accompanied by Little Hawk. The young warrior's eyes widened at the sight of Singing Bird, and he immediately lowered his gaze respectfully. Swift Elk spoke rapidly to his grandmother in Sioux. The old woman listened, occasionally interjecting with sharp questions. Finally, she turned back to Sarah. "Outlaws come," she announced. 8 men with many guns, very angry." She cackled suddenly, revealing teeth worn down to nubs. "Good. Angry men make mistakes. Swift Elk shook his head, a hint of exasperation. Crossing his features, grandmother enjoys battle too much for one so old. Not too old to curse disrespectful grandsons, Singing Bird retorted, but there was fondness in her voice. She jabbed her stick toward the cave. Take the water woman inside. Show her paintings. I go help warriors prepare surprises for stupid white men. Without waiting for a response, she hobbled past them with surprising speed, disappearing among the stone formations. Water woman? Sarah questioned. Swift Elk's mouth quirked in what might have been the beginning of a smile. She sees things others do not. Give names based on spirit, not flesh. He gestured toward the cave. Come. Safer. Inside. Sarah hesitated at the threshold, peering into the darkness beyond. What's in there? History, Swift Elk replied. My people's stories are written in stone and paint. He offered his hand. Not all white people are permitted to see. Consider it an honor. Sarah placed her hand in his, allowing him to guide her. Into the cave. The temperature dropped immediately, cool air washing over her skin like a balm. For several steps they walked in near total darkness. Then the passage widened into a large chamber dimly lit by narrow shafts of sunlight filtering through cracks in the ceiling. Sarah gasped as her eyes adjusted. The walls of the cavern were covered in paintings, hundreds of them, overlapping in places, telling stories that spanned generations. Handprints in red ochre mingled with depictions of buffalo hunts, battles, and strange supernatural figures with the heads of animals and bodies of men. How old are these? She whispered, afraid to speak normally lest she disturb the ancient. Magic of the place. Oldest ones? Swift Elk ran his fingers reverently over a faded image of what appeared to be a great bear rearing up on its hind legs. Many hundreds of winters. My ancestors sheltered here during great cold times, when snow never melted. He led her deeper into the chamber, pointing out particular images. A circle of warriors dancing around a fire, a line of strange dome-shaped dwellings, a herd of buffalo tumbling over a cliff. Our stories, he explained. How we lived. How we hunted. How we fought. He paused before a more recent painting showing mounted warriors facing men in blue uniforms. How we die. Sarah studied the battle scene, noting the careful detail of the rifles the soldiers carried, the American flag painted above them. History recorded not by the victors, but by those fighting for survival. My people have stories too, she said, softly, but we keep them in books, not on walls. Swift Elk nodded. Books burn. Walls stand. A distant shout echoed from outside, followed by the crack of rifles. Swift Elk tensed, hand going to the knife at his belt. They're here, Sarah said, her brief moment of wonder shattered by the reality of their situation. Stay, Swift Elk commanded, already moving toward the cave entrance. Do not come out until I return. Wait, Sarah caught his arm. I can help. I can shoot. Swift Elk's expression softened slightly. I know, but this fight is not yours. They're hunting me, she insisted. That makes it my fight. A commotion at the cave entrance interrupted them. Black Wolf appeared, supporting a limping stone hand. Blood soaked the older warrior's legging, where a bullet had found its mark. Black Wolf barked something in Sioux, his voice urgent. Swift Elk responded sharply, pointing deeper into the cave. What's happening? Sarah asked, as Swift Elk helped ease Stonehand to the ground. Outlaws split up, he explained grimly. 6 attacks from the front, 2 circles behind trying to trap us in rocks. He tore a strip from his own shirt, binding it tightly around Stonehand's bleeding thigh. Black Wolf says we should leave wounded and run. Sarah knelt beside the injured warrior, examining the wound. The bullet had passed clean through the fleshy part of his thigh, missing the bone and major blood vessels. Painful, but not immediately life-threatening if the bleeding could be controlled. We can't just leave him, she said, pressing her hands. over the makeshift bandage to stem the flow of blood. Swift Elk's eyes met hers, something like approval flickering in their depths. "No, we cannot." Outside, the gunfire intensified. Little Hawk skidded into the cave, breathing hard, a shallow cut bleeding across his forehead where a bullet had grazed him. "Reed comes," he reported between gasps. "Very angry. Says he will burn us out." Sarah felt her blood run cold. "The paintings, not just paintings," Swift Elk said, rising to his feet. "My grandmother, running fox, all who cannot fight." He turned to Black Wolf, the two men exchanging rapid words in their native tongue. Though Sarah couldn't understand the language, the meaning was clear from their gestures. They were formulating a plan, disagreeing, compromising. Finally, Swift Elk turned back to her. "I need your help. Anything. You know these men," he said. "Know how they think, how they fight." Sarah nodded. She had spent weeks watching the Blackwater boys, learning their routines, their weaknesses, their brutal methods. "Reed is a proud man," Swift Elk continued. "Thinks with heart, not head when angry." "Yes?" "Yes," Sarah confirmed. "He can't stand to lose, especially not to people he considers beneath him." A grim smile touched Swift Elk's lips. "Good. Then we use his pride against him." He turned to Little Hawk. "Bring my grandmother's medicine bag." The young warrior darted deeper into the cave, returning moments later with a leather pouch decorated with colorful beadwork. Swift Elk emptied its contents onto the stone floor, bundles of dried herbs, small bone implements, and various pouches. Of pigment, he selected a red ochre stick and a small clay pot containing a black substance that smelled strongly of burned pine. "Come," he said to Sarah. "We make you into bait." "Bait?" she repeated, startled. "Reed hunts you," Swift Elk explained, uncorking a water skin. "So we let him find you." Understanding dawned as Swift Elk mixed the black pigment with water. This wasn't a plan to abandon her, but to use Reed's obsession to their advantage. Little Hawk distributed ammunition to Black Wolf and the other warriors who had taken shelter in the cave. Outside, the gunfire had decreased to occasional shots, conserving bullets, Sarah realized. The outlaws were settling in for a siege. Swift Elk dipped his fingers into the black paste. "May I?" he asked, holding his hand near her face. Sarah nodded, closing her eyes as his fingers traced cool lines across her cheekbones, down her chin. The mixture smelled of ash and pine sap, earthy and primal. "What is this for?" she asked as he worked. "War paint," he replied, switching to the red ochre, drawing sharp lines across her forehead. "Protects spirit, frightens enemies." His fingers lingered briefly at her temple. "Makes you look like a Sioux woman." Sarah opened her eyes to find Swift Elk studying her with an expression she couldn't quite read. For a moment something passed between them, a recognition perhaps of the strangeness of their alliance, of the forces that had brought them together. Across the divide of their peoples, the moment broke as Singing Bird hobbled into the main chamber, her wizened face creased with concern. She spoke rapidly to Swift Elk, gesturing toward the rear of the cave. "Second passage," Swift Elk translated for Sarah, "leads to a hidden valley. Horses there." He glanced at Stonehand, whose face had gone ashen with pain. "We can escape, but risk outlaws following." "Or," Sarah prompted, sensing the unspoken alternative. Swift Elk's expression hardened. "Or we end this. Now." Sarah touched the war paint on her face, feeling its tacky consistency beneath her fingertips. She thought of her family, cut down without mercy at Blackwater Pass, of the weeks of captivity and humiliation, of Matthews's cruelty and Reed's cold calculation. "I'm tired of running," she said quietly. "Let's end it." Swift Elk nodded once, then turned to relay instructions to the others. Black Wolf argued briefly, pointing at Sarah with obvious distrust, but eventually nodded grudgingly. As the warriors prepared, checking weapons and gathering what supplies they could carry, Swift drew Sarah aside. "Plan is dangerous," he said bluntly. "You understand? Could die." "I understand," she replied, squaring her shoulders. "But I won't die running." Swift Elk studied her for a long moment, then reached for his belt, removing a sheathed knife. Not the small blade he had thrown at Reed, but a larger one with a bone, handle carved in the shape of a wolf's head. "Take this," he said, pressing it into her hands. "Better than a little knife in a dress." Sarah gripped the weapon, testing its weight and balance. The blade was wicked sharp, gleaming in the dim cave light. "I'm not very good with it," she admitted. "I missed when I tried to cut Matthews." Swift Elk's hand covered hers, adjusting her. "Grip on the knife. Like this," he demonstrated. "Don't swing. Strike straight, pull back, let the blade do work." His proximity sent an unexpected warmth through Sarah's body, a sharp reminder that beneath the fear and danger, she was still alive, still human, still capable of feeling something beyond terror and grief. A final shout from outside jerked them back to reality. Reed's voice, close enough now that his words carried clearly to the cave entrance. "We know you're in there, Sarah. Come out now, and maybe I'll let your red friends live." Swift Elk's eyes met hers, dark and determined. "Ready?" Sarah gripped the knife tightly, thinking of her father's last smile as he helped her into the wagon. That fateful day, of her mother's songs around the campfire, of Timothy's laughter as he chased fireflies in the gathering dusk. "Ready," she said, and meant it. Together they moved toward the cave entrance and whatever fate awaited them in the blood-red light of the setting sun. Dusk painted the medicine rocks in shades of amber and gold as Sarah crouched behind a massive boulder, Swift Elk's knife clutched in her sweating palm. The war paint felt strange on her face, drying to a tight mask that cracked when she frowned. Her heart thundered against her ribs, each beat a reminder that she was alive, that despite everything, death had not yet claimed her. "Remember," Swift Elk murmured beside her, his breath warm against her ear, "you appear only when I signal, not before." She nodded, the plan clear in her mind. Swift Elk would lead 3 warriors in a frontal assault, drawing Reed's attention. Meanwhile, Black Wolf and Little Hawk would circle behind the outlaws, cutting off their retreat. Sarah would remain hidden until the critical moment, her appearance designed to distract Reed long enough for Swift Elk to strike. "What if something goes wrong?" she whispered. Swift Elk's expression remained impassive, but his eyes softened slightly. "Then we improvise." He touched the eagle feather in his hair, a gesture Sarah had come to recognize as a habit when he was contemplating something important. Courage is knowing fear and acting anyway. With that, he was gone, slipping away like smoke between the towering rock formations. Sarah watched him go, then settled into wait, counting her breaths to keep panic at bay. The minutes stretched like hours. From her position, she could see little of what transpired beyond her shelter, though she heard everything: the occasional shout, a rifle shot echoing against stone, the shuffling of boots on gravel. Reed's voice carried clearly, issuing orders. To his men, his tone growing increasingly frustrated as the cat-and-mouse game continued. "Spread out!" the outlaw leader barked. "Davis, check those rocks to the north. Williams, cover him!" Sarah tensed at the mention of Davis, one of Reed's most loyal men, a barrel-chested former prizefighter with hands like sledgehammers. She had seen him break a man's jaw with a single punch during her captivity and had witnessed the pleasure he took in others' pain. If anyone rivaled Matthews in cruelty, it was Davis. The light faded further, shadows lengthening across the ancient landscape. In the dimness, Sarah could just make out the entrance to the cave where Stone Hand remained with Singing Bird and Running Fox. From this angle, it appeared as nothing, more than a darker patch among the rocks. Easy to miss if you didn't know what to look for. A sudden commotion broke the tense silence. Shouts and the rapid crack of gunfire from the northern edge of the rock formation. Swift Elk had made his move. Sarah gripped the knife tighter, preparing for her part in the plan. "It's a diversion," Reed shouted. "They're trying to draw us away from the cave." More gunfire, then a scream of pain. One of the outlaws caught by a Sioux arrow or bullet. Sarah counted the shots, knowing each man's ammunition must be running low after the day's pursuit. Movement to her right, a flash of color against stone. She froze, pressing herself flat against the boulder as footsteps approached. Heavy breathing, the metallic click of a revolver being cocked. Come out, wherever you are," sang a familiar voice that sent ice through Sarah's veins. Frank Matthews, somehow alive despite the tomahawk wound to his shoulder. He must have caught up with Reed during the pursuit, his hatred for Sarah driving him forward despite his injury. She held her breath as he passed within feet of her hiding place, the scent of blood and sweat wafting on the evening air. His left arm hung uselessly at his side, the sleeve of his shirt dark with dried blood. In his right hand he clutched a revolver, finger twitching against the trigger. Matthews paused, cocking his head like a predator scenting prey. Sarah didn't move, didn't breathe, every muscle tense with the effort of absolute stillness. "I know you're here somewhere, little bride," Matthews called, his voice carrying a sing-song quality that was more terrifying than his usual growl. "Reed may want you alive, but I'll settle for your corpse. Either way, you're coming back with us." The signal came then, a bird call, too perfect to be natural, echoing between the stone pillars. Swift Elk's command to act. Sarah remained frozen, torn between the plan and the imminent danger of Matthews just steps away. Another bird call, more urgent this time. Decision made, she shifted position, deliberately scraping her boot against stone. Matthews whirled toward the sound, firearm raised. "There you are," he breathed, a terrible smile spreading across his face as he spotted her. "Looking mighty peculiar with that paint, but I'd know those eyes anywhere." Sarah stood slowly, Swift Elk's knife partially concealed in the folds of her tattered dress. She forced herself to meet Matthew's gaze, summoning all the hatred and rage she had suppressed during her captivity. "You should have died at Blue Hollow," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. Matthews laughed, the sound brittle and cold in the gathering darkness. "Takes more than a savage's hatchet to kill me," he gestured with the revolver. "Now be a good girl and walk ahead of me back to Reed. Try anything, and I put a bullet in your leg. Won't kill you, but you won't enjoy the ride back." Sarah took a deliberate step forward, then another, calculating the distance between them. Swift Elk had shown her how to throw the knife, a skill she'd had no time to practice but might be her only chance. As she neared Matthews, his smile widened, revealing teeth stained with tobacco. "That's it. Knew you'd see reason eventually." 5 feet away. 4. Close enough to smell the sickness emanating from his infected wound. Matthews reached for her with his injured arm, involuntarily grimacing as the movement sent pain through his shoulder. That moment of distraction was all she needed. Sarah drew the knife and lunged, driving the blade toward Matthew's chest, just as Swift Elk had taught her. A straight thrust, letting the weapon do the work. Matthews was faster than she anticipated. He twisted aside, the knife slicing across his ribs rather than finding his heart. He howled in pain and rage, the revolver swinging toward her face. Sarah ducked, tackling him around the waist, sending them both crashing to the ground. The impact drove the air from her lungs. Matthew's injured shoulder struck stone, his scream echoing off the rocks around them. The revolver spun away, skittering across gravel beyond either's reach. They grappled in the dirt, Matthew's superior strength countered by his injuries and Sarah's desperate fury. She clawed at his face, drawing blood from his cheek and eye. He caught her wrist, twisting until pain shot up her arm, forcing her to release the knife. "Should have known you'd fight dirty," Matthews snarled, flipping her onto her back, his weight pinning her to the ground. Always did have more spirit than sense. His hands found her throat, squeezing with terrible purpose. Sarah bucked beneath him, black spots dancing at the edges of her vision as her airway closed. She scratched at his arms, his face finding no purchase. The world began to narrow. Darkness, creeping in from all sides. With her last coherent thought, Sarah's fingers scrabbled in the dirt beside her, searching for anything she could use as a weapon. They closed around a jagged stone the size of an apple. Using the last of her strength, she swung it upward, connecting with Matthew's temple with a sickening crack. His grip on her throat slackened instantly. For a heartbeat, their eyes met, his wife with shock, hers burning with the will to survive. Then he toppled sideways, blood streaming from the wound in his head, eyes still open but seeing nothing. Sarah rolled away, coughing and gasping as air rushed back into her lungs. She crawled to where Swift Elk's knife had fallen, clutching it like a lifeline as she struggled to her feet. Matthews lay motionless on the ground, the rise and fall of his chest shallow but present, unconscious, not dead. She stood over him, knife poised, the opportunity for vengeance laid bare before her. One slash across his throat, that's all it would take to end the man who had intended to make her his unwilling bride, who had been complicit in her family's murder. Her hand trembled, memories washing over her in a crimson tide. Timothy's face as they dragged him from the wagon, her mother's silent scream, her father falling beneath a hail of arrows. Justice demanded blood, yet something held her back, not mercy, but the understanding that killing a defenseless man, even one as deserving as Matthews, would change her in ways she wasn't prepared to face. The knife lowered slowly to her side. Vengeance could wait. Survival came first. A rifle shot cracked nearby, followed by shouts and the sounds of struggle. The main battle was still underway. Sarah backed away from Matthew's unconscious form, orienting herself toward the prearranged meeting point where Swift Elk would look for her if the plan went awry. Twilight had deepened to true darkness, the stone formations looming like sentinels against the star-strewn sky. Sarah moved cautiously, using the shadows for cover, Swift Elk's knife ready in her hand. The fighting seemed to have moved to the western edge of the Medicine Rocks, near a narrow passage that led back to the plains beyond. She rounded a massive boulder and came face to face with Reed himself. The outlaw leader's hat was gone, a bloody gash marking his forehead where a bullet or arrow had grazed him. His rifle was empty, the chamber open as he fumbled to reload. With fingers slick with blood, they froze, staring at each other in mutual shock. Reed recovered first, a slow smile spreading across his weathered face as he recognized her despite the war paint. "Well, well," he drawled, abandoning the rifle to draw a wicked hunting knife from his belt. "Looks like you've gone native, Sarah." "Can't say the paint suits you." Sarah raised Swift Elk's knife, circling sideways to keep distance between them. Unlike Matthews, Reed was neither injured nor underestimating her. His eyes tracked her movements with calculating precision. "Your men are dying," she said, hoping to distract him. "Matthews is down. It's over, Reed." The outlaw leader chuckled, the sound devoid of humor. "Nothing's over till I say it is." He gestured at her with his knife. "Didn't take you for a fighter? Thought you were just another pretty face with more tears than spine? You never bothered to look closer. My mistake." Reed's knuckles whitened around the knife handle. "Won't happen again." He lunged forward with surprising speed for a man his age. Sarah sidestepped, slashing with her own blade, catching only air as Reed pivoted smoothly. He was toying with her, she realized, a cat playing with its mouse before the kill. "The savage taught you some tricks," Reed observed, circling her like a wolf. "But you're still just a girl way out of her depth." Sarah didn't waste breath on a reply. She needed to focus, to remember Swift Elk's lessons. Don't swing, strike straight, let the blade do the work. Reed came at her again, feinting left before striking right. The tip of his knife sliced through her sleeve, drawing a thin line of blood along her forearm. Sarah hissed in pain but didn't retreat, countering with a thrust of her own that forced Reed to jump backward. "Got some spirit after all," he acknowledged, a new wariness in his eyes. "Good. Makes it more interesting." Their deadly dance continued, each probing for weakness, neither finding an opening. Sarah felt her strength waning. Too many hours without proper food or rest, too much fear and adrenaline burning through her reserves. Reed seemed tireless, his movements economical and practiced. A misstep on uneven ground nearly cost Sarah everything. Her ankle turned, sending her stumbling backward against a stone pillar. Reed pounced, knife raised for a killing blow. Sarah threw herself sideways, the blade striking sparks as it scraped against rock where her head had been a moment before. Off balance, Reed stumbled forward. Sarah swept her leg out, catching his ankle and sending him crashing to the ground. His knife skittered away into darkness. She leapt on him, her own blade pressing against his throat. Reed went still, eyes locked on hers, his breath coming in short gasps. "Go on, then," he challenged. "Finish it, if you've got the stomach for it." Sarah's hand trembled, the edge of the blade dimpling the skin of Reed's throat. A drop of blood welled up black in the moonlight. Just a little more pressure. "That's all it would take. Your father would be proud," Reed said, his voice suddenly soft, knowing. "Thomas Holloway was a killer too. Did you know that? Before he got religion and decided to play at being a farmer, the name hit Sarah like a physical blow." "You knew my father?" Reed's smile was a terrible thing to behold. "Rode with him back in '58, before you were born. He could slit a man's throat in his sleep and still say grace over breakfast. You're lying." Sarah pressed the knife harder, drawing more blood. "Ask yourself why the Sioux targeted your wagon train specifically," Reed continued, seemingly unconcerned. "With the blade at his throat. Your pa had history with them, bad blood. They weren't after the others, they were after him. The rest was just collateral." Doubt crept in, poisonous and cold. Could it be true? Her father, the gentleman who had taught her to read by lamplight, who had never raised his voice even in anger, could he have been like these men once? Reed sensed her hesitation and struck, knocking her hand aside and surging upward. The knife went flying as they grappled, rolling across the rocky ground, each fighting for dominance. Reed was stronger, but Sarah fought with the desperation of one who had already lost everything. A whistle cut through the night, 3 short notes followed by one long. The Sioux signaled to retreat. Something had gone wrong with the plan. Reed heard it too, his head turning instinctively toward the sound. That momentary distraction was all Sarah needed. She grabbed a handful of dirt and flung it into his eyes, temporarily blinding him. As he cursed and clawed at his face, she scrambled away, searching frantically for the knife. A hand closed around her ankle, dragging her backward. Reed loomed over her, face contorted with rage, eyes red and streaming from the dirt. "Enough games," he snarled, fist raised to strike. An arrow whistled through the darkness, burying itself in Reed's side. He jerked backward with a hoarse cry, clutching at the shaft protruding from between his ribs. Swift elk materialized from the shadows, another arrow already knocked in his bow. His face was grim, a fresh cut bleeding along his jawline. "Step away." "From her," he commanded, bowstring drawn taut. Reed stumbled backward, one hand pressed to his bleeding side, the other raised in a placating gesture. "Now hold on, Chief. No need for more bloodshed." His eyes darted between Swift Elk and Sarah. "We can make a deal here. I've got gold, plenty of it. Enough to make you a rich man among your people." Swift Elk's expression didn't change. "Gold. Cannot bring back the people you killed. Wasn't personal," Reed insisted, his voice strained with pain. "Just business. You understand business, don't you?" Sarah retrieved Swift Elk's knife from where it had fallen, her gaze never leaving Reed. "He doesn't deal with murderers." Reed's facade of reasonableness slipped, revealing the cold killer beneath. Says the girl who just tried to cut my throat. We're all killers here, sweetheart. Some of us are just honest about it. Swift Elk lost. His arrow, it struck the ground between Reed's feet. A warning, not a miss. Next one goes through your heart, he promised, unless you leave. Now. Reed's face contorted with fury and frustration. This isn't over, he spat, backing away toward the narrow pass that led from the medicine rocks. I've still got men out there. We'll regroup and then— Your men are dead or fled, Swift Elk interrupted. You are alone. Something flickered. In Reed's eyes, doubt, perhaps, or the first real stirrings of fear. Without another word, he turned and disappeared into the darkness beyond the rock formations. Sarah exhaled shakily, the knife dropping from suddenly nerveless fingers. The adrenaline that had sustained her ebbed away, leaving her light-headed and trembling. Are you hurt? Swift Elk asked, moving to her side. Just a cut, she managed, gesturing to her forearm where Reed's knife had sliced her. Nothing serious. Swift Elk examined the wound with gentle fingers before tearing a strip from his own shirt to bind it. The tenderness of the gesture brought unexpected tears to Sarah's eyes. How long had it been since someone had shown her such care? The others? She asked, blinking back the moisture. Stonehand? Singing Bird? Safe, Swift Elk assured her, securing the makeshift bandage. We lead the outlaws away from the cave. Black Wolf and Running Fox pursue the last two who fled west. He studied her face in the moonlight. Matthews. Alive, Sarah replied. Unconscious by the North Rocks. Swift Elk nodded, helping her to her feet. We will deal with him later. He retrieved his knife, wiping it clean before returning it to its sheath. Come, night grows cold. Together they made their way back toward the cave, navigating the maze of stone by starlight. Sarah's mind whirled with all that had transpired. Her confrontation with Matthews, Reed's startling claims about her father, the realization that for now, at least, they were safe. At the cave entrance, Little Hawk waited, rifle in hand. His young face split into a wide grin at the sight of them, relief evident in every line of his body. You live, he exclaimed, clasping Swift Elk's forearm in greeting before turning to Sarah with undisguised admiration. Black Wolf said white. Women would run or die. I say he was wrong. Swift Elk replied in Sioux, his tone carrying a note of pride that transcended language barriers. Little Hawk nodded, then disappeared inside to deliver news of their return. Sarah paused at the threshold, suddenly overwhelmed by exhaustion. The events of the past day, the escape from Blue Hollow, the desperate ride to Medicine Rocks, the confrontations with Matthews and Reed crashed over her like a wave, threatening to pull her under. Swift Elk caught her as her knees buckled, his arms strong around her waist. Rest now, he said softly. Battle is over. Is it? Sarah whispered, remembering Reed's parting words. This isn't over. Swift Elk seemed to read her thoughts. Reed is wounded, alone. His men scattered or died. He cannot hurt you tonight. And tomorrow? Tomorrow is another day, he replied simply. Tonight we have wounds. Regain strength. He guided her into the cave, where the soft glow of a small fire cast dancing shadows on ancient walls. Tonight we remember we are alive. Inside, Singing Bird had prepared a simple meal, strips of dried meat, wild roots roasted in the fire's embers, and a tea that smelled of sage and cedar. Stonehand reclined against a bear pelt, his wounded leg stretched before him, face drawn with pain, but eyes alert. Running Fox had returned, his rifle leaning against the wall beside him, expression grim as he reported something in low tones to Black Wolf. Black Wolf looked up as they entered, his perpetual scowl deepening at the sight of Sarah. He said something, sharp in Sioux, gesturing at her with obvious disapproval. Swift Elk responded firmly, his stance protective as he guided Sarah to a place by the fire. The tension in the air was palpable, yet different from before, charged not with the immediate threat of violence, but with the uncertain currents of disparate worlds colliding. As Sarah sank gratefully onto a woven mat near the flames, singing, Bird approached, pressing a wooden cup of hot tea into her hands. The old woman studied her face, weathered fingers tracing the now smudged war paint with something like satisfaction. Water woman becomes warrior woman, she announced, her accent thick but her meaning clear. Good change, strong change. Sarah accepted the tea with murmured thanks, too exhausted to question the old woman's cryptic words. The warmth of the fire, the relative safety of the cave, and the presence of swift elk nearby combined to create a pocket of calm amid the chaos that had become her life. As the others settled around the fire, speaking quietly in their native tongue, Sarah found herself studying Swift Elk's profile in the flickering light. The stern lines of his face, the small scar that bisected his left eyebrow, the way his hands moved with deliberate grace as he spoke, all had become familiar. To her, in the space of a single day, he glanced her way, catching her gaze. For a moment, neither looked away, something unspoken passing between them, an acknowledgement perhaps of the strange bond forged in blood and danger. At that moment, surrounded by people who should have been her enemies, Sarah realized she felt safer than she had since the day her family was taken from her at Blackwater Pass. The irony wasn't lost on her, finding sanctuary among those she had been taught to fear, while those of her own kind had brought nothing but suffering. He survived, and now rides with Crow. Swift Elk's tone held a note of suspicion. Interesting coincidence. Sarah remembered Major Daniel Ellis, his easy smile, the way he'd entertained the children with stories around the campfire, how he'd always seemed to know exactly which route to take through difficult terrain. He'd been hired in St. Louis to guide their party safely to California, his experience in the Western Territories supposedly unmatched. Maybe he escaped like I did, Sarah suggested. Found allies among the Crow. Swift Elk made a non-committal sound, clearly reserving judgment. We will meet them, hear what they have to say. He turned to Running Fox, issuing instructions in Sioux. The older warrior nodded and disappeared among the rocks, presumably to inform the others. Little Hawk remained at his post, rifle ready should the visitors prove less peaceful than their, Flag suggested. Stay close to me, Swift Elk told Sarah as they descended to the natural amphitheater at the foot of Medicine Rocks. Let me speak first, she nodded, tension building in her chest as they waited. Singing Bird joined them, her wizened face solemn as she leaned on her walking stick. Stone Hand followed more slowly, limping but determined, refusing Running Fox's offered support. The approaching party became visible at the entrance to the stone formation. 15 riders, 10 of them clearly Crow warriors, with their distinctive style of dress and ornamentation. The others were white men, in a mixture of frontier and military clothing, all heavily armed despite their flag of peace. Major Ellis rode at their head, looking much as Sarah remembered him, though perhaps more weathered, a new scar running along his hairline. His eyes widened slightly as he spotted her among the Sioux, genuine surprise registering on his features. The party halted at a respectful distance. Ellis dismounted, handing his reins to the warrior beside him before approaching on foot, hands held open to show he carried no weapon. I come in peace to speak with Chief Swift Elk of the Hunkpapa Sioux, he announced in a carrying voice. Swift Elk stepped forward, his bearing regal despite his wounded state. I am Swift Elk, son of Chief Heavy Shield. Why do you come to Medicine Rocks with so many warriors if you seek peace? Ellis dipped his head in acknowledgement. These dangerous times call for caution, as I'm sure you understand. His gaze shifted. To Sarah, a complicated expression crossing his face. Miss Holloway, I could hardly believe my eyes when my scouts reported a white woman among your party. We all thought you perished with your family at Blackwater Pass." "As I thought you had, Major," Sarah replied, studying him carefully. Something felt off about his appearance here, though she couldn't pinpoint what. "A miracle we both survived," Ellis said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "When I heard rumors of a Sioux war party attacking the Blue Hollow camp, I hoped against hope you might be found alive. I see the Blackwater boys have taken you prisoner." "How did you know that?" Sarah asked, a chill running down her spine. "How could you possibly know I was at Blue Hollow?" Ellis faltered just for a moment before regaining his composure. "Word travels fast on the frontier, Miss Holloway, especially news of massacres and captives." Swift Elk took a half-step forward, positioning himself subtly between Sarah and Ellis. "You have not answered my question, Major Ellis. Why have you come?" "To offer my assistance," Ellis replied smoothly. "Miss Holloway is my responsibility. I was hired to see her family safely in California. I failed once. I won't fail again." He spread his hands in a gesture of openness. "I've come to escort her to Fort Hayes, where she'll be safe among her own kind." The words were reasonable, his tone sincere, yet Sarah felt a growing sense of wrongness. How had Ellis survived when everyone else at Blackwater Pass had died? How had he found Crow allies and tracked her to Medicine Rock so quickly? "Sarah makes her own choice," Swift Elk said, surprising her with the use of her first name. "She is not property to be claimed." Ellis's smile tightened at the edges. "Of course not. I merely assumed she would want to return to civilization after her ordeal." He turned to Sarah directly. "My dear, you must have been through unimaginable horrors. Let me take you to safety." Before Sarah could respond, Singing Bird stepped forward, her walking stick tapping against the stone as she approached Ellis. The old woman circled him slowly, muttering to herself in Sioux. Ellis stood stiffly, clearly, uncomfortable under her scrutiny. "Death Shadow follows this one," Singing Bird announced in her accented English, loud enough for all to hear. "He brings lies wrapped in truth, poison in sweet water." Ellis's expression hardened. "I don't understand what she's saying." "She says you cannot be trusted," Swift Elk translated, his hand dropping casually to rest on the knife at his belt. "This is absurd," Ellis scoffed. "Miss Holloway, surely you don't believe in these superstitions? Come with me now. The fort is only a day's ride." Sarah hesitated, torn between the logical choice, returning to her own people, and the instinct screaming that something about Ellis was deeply wrong. She looked at Swift Elk, finding steady reassurance in his dark eyes, then back to Ellis, whose pleasant facade seemed increasingly strained. A movement among the rocks caught her attention, a flash of color where there should have been none, a hint of motion too deliberate to be natural. She tensed, scanning the ridgeline above them. "Major," she began carefully, "how did you find me here? Precisely, I mean." Ellis waved a dismissive hand. "As I said, rumors about the raid on Blue Hollow. My Crow friends are excellent trackers." "And how did you survive Blackwater Pass when my family didn't?" A flicker of annoyance crossed his features. "I was scouting ahead when the attack came. By the time I returned, it was too late to help." His smile returned, though it seemed forced now. "Miss Holloway, we can discuss all this on the way to the fort. Daylight's wasting, and these lands aren't safe." Sarah took a deliberate step closer, to Swift Elk. "One more question, Major. How did you know the men who attacked our wagon train were called the Blackwater Boys? I never mentioned their name." Ellis froze, the pleasant mask slipping completely. In that moment, Sarah saw what had been hidden beneath: cold calculation, barely contained rage, and something worse: recognition. He knew she had caught him. "Clever girl," he said softly, his voice dropping to a register she had never heard from him before. "Too clever for your own good, always were. Everything happened at once." Ellis whistled sharply, a signal, not an expression of admiration. From the rocks above, rifles appeared, aimed at the small group of Sioux. The Crow warriors with Ellis drew weapons, though they looked confused, clearly not expecting this turn of events. Swift Elk reacted instantly, shoving Sarah toward the shelter of a nearby boulder as the first shots rang out. Little Hawk's rifle answered from his hidden position, dropping one of Ellis's men from his perch among the rocks. "It was you!" Sarah gasped as understanding dawned, the final pieces falling into place. "You led us into the ambush at Blackwater. Pass. You were working with Reed all along." Ellis drew a revolver from inside his coat. "Reed was supposed to kill all of you, not take you captive. The man always did have a weakness for pretty faces." He aimed the gun at Swift Elk. "Now I'll finish what should have ended weeks ago." Sarah didn't think. She launched herself at Ellis, catching him around the waist and disrupting his aim. The gun discharged, the bullet ricocheting off stone as they crashed to the ground. Ellis backhanded her, the blow sending stars across her vision as she rolled. Away, all around them chaos erupted. The Medicine Rocks echoed with gunfire as Swift Elk's warriors engaged Ellis's men. The Crow, realizing they had been deceived, turned on their supposed allies, adding to the confusion. Sarah scrambled to her feet, tasting blood where her lip had split. Ellis advanced on her, fury contorting his features into something barely human. "Your father should have stayed dead," he snarled. "He knew too much, had too many friends in high places. We couldn't let him reach California with what he knew about the gold routes." "My father," Sarah whispered, understanding blooming. Like blood in water. He wasn't running from his past. He was running from you. Ellis's smile was terrible to behold. Thomas Holloway thought he could leave his old life behind, become a farmer, raise a family in peace. But some debts can't be settled with land. And crops. He raised the revolver again. "I'm collecting his debt in full now." A tomahawk whistled through the air, burying itself in Ellis's shoulder with sickening force. He screamed, the gun dropping from suddenly nerveless fingers. Swift Elk appeared beside Sarah, blood streaming from a cut above his eye, but otherwise unharmed. "Run!" he urged her, pushing her toward the cave entrance. "Get to horses." "Not without you," she insisted, gripping his arm. A new voice cut through the chaos, freezing them both in place. "Nobody's going anywhere." Jackson Reed emerged from behind a stone pillar, rifle aimed at Swift Elk's chest. His face was ashen, the wound in his side clearly infected, but hatred gave him strength. Behind him stood Frank Matthews, a bandage wrapped around his head where Sarah had struck him, and 3 remaining Blackwater boys, all armed and vicious. "Quite a reunion," Reed drawled, glancing at Ellis, who knelt clutching his wounded shoulder. "The Major, the Savage, and the girl who keeps refusing to die. Almost poetic." Ellis glared up at Reed, teeth gritted against pain. "You were supposed to bring reinforcements from the fort, not come charging in half-cocked." "Change of plans," Reed replied without taking his eyes off Swift Elk and Sarah. "Figured why share the glory when I could handle things myself? Besides, your soldier friends ask too many questions." Sarah's mind raced, calculating angles, distances, options. Stonehand and Running Fox were pinned down by gunfire near the western rocks. Little Hawk was nowhere to be seen. Captured or hidden, she couldn't tell. The singing bird had disappeared into the cave at the first sign of trouble. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and caught in the open. "Let her go," Swift Elk said, his voice steady despite their desperate situation. "Your quarrel is with me now." Reed laughed, the sound echoing off the ancient stones. "Noble to the end, aren't you? But no, the girl's seen too much, knows too much." He gestured to Matthews. "Frank here has a personal interest in seeing her punished, don't you, Frank?" Matthews stepped forward, his eyes burning with malice as they fixed on Sarah. The bandage on his head was stained rusty brown with dried blood. His left arm still hung uselessly at his side, yet his hatred seemed to sustain him beyond physical limitations. "You should have killed me when you had the chance," he told Sarah, drawing a knife from his belt. "Now I'll take my time with you." Swift Elk moved with lightning speed, placing himself between Sarah and the advancing Matthews. "You touch her, you die." Reed raised his rifle slightly. "Stay where you are, Chief, or I put a bullet through that noble head of yours." The standoff stretched, tension crackling in the air like electricity before a storm. Sarah's hand slipped to the small knife still hidden in the folds of her ruined dress, Maggie's gift, too insignificant to have been taken from her. A pitiful weapon against rifles, but better than nothing. Ellis struggled to his feet, face contorted with pain as he wrenched the tomahawk from his shoulder. "Enough of this. Kill them both and be done with it. We've wasted too much time already." "In a hurry to get back to your gold, Major?" Sarah called, playing for time, desperately hoping for some opportunity to present itself. "Is that what this is about? What did my father know?" Ellis's eyes narrowed. "Your father discovered something he shouldn't have, a new pass through the Sierra Nevada, a route that would make controlling the California gold shipments possible for whoever held it." He gestured with his good arm. "Worth killing for, wouldn't you say?" "He was your friend," Sarah said, disgust welling up inside her. "He trusted you. Trust is a luxury for the dead," Ellis replied coldly. "Reed, finish this, now." Reed raised his rifle to his shoulder, taking careful aim at Swift Elk. Sarah tensed, prepared to throw herself forward, knowing it would mean her death, but unable to watch Swift Elk die for her. The shot that rang out didn't come from Reed's rifle. It cracked from somewhere above them, echoing against the stone formations. Reed staggered backward, blood blossoming across his chest as he looked down in shock at the wound. Black Wolf stood atop the highest rock, rifle still raised, face painted for war, every inch the feared warrior of Plains legend. Behind him appeared more Sioux fighters, 20 at least, all armed, all descending on the scene like avenging spirits. Chaos erupted once more. Matthews lunged forward despite the new threat, determined to reach Sarah even as his companions dove for cover. Swift Elk met him halfway, the two men crashing together in a brutal contest of strength and will. Sarah turned to face Ellis, who was scrambling for Reed's fallen rifle. She launched herself at him, driving her small knife into his already wounded shoulder. He howled in agony, twisting to throw her off, stronger despite his injury. They grappled in the dust, Ellis's hands finding her throat, just as Matthews's had the day before. Sarah clawed at his face, seeking vulnerable points. Eyes, throat, the wound in his shoulder. Her vision began to darken at the edges, lungs burning for air. A shadow fell across them. Swift Elk stood over them, blood streaming from a new wound across his chest, where Matthews had caught him with a blade. With terrible purpose, he drove his knife into Ellis's back, twisting the blade with grim finality. Ellis's grip on Sarah's throat slackened. He made a wet, choking sound, eyes wide with shock and denial. Then he crumpled forward, his weight momentarily pinning Sarah before Swift Elk pulled her free. Around them, the battle turned swiftly. The arrival of Black Wolf's reinforcements had overwhelmed the remaining outlaws. Matthews lay motionless nearby, his unseeing eyes fixed on the sky above, a wound in his chest marking where Swift Elk's blade had found his heart. Sarah gasped for breath, her throat bruised and painful, her entire body trembling with exhaustion and fading adrenaline. Swift Elk knelt beside her, his own breathing labored, blood seeping through his shirt where Matthews had cut him. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough with concern. Sarah shook her head, still unable to speak. Around them, the gunfire had ceased, replaced by the sounds of the wounded and the dying. Black Wolf approached, his stern face betraying no emotion as he surveyed the scene. He spoke briefly to Swift Elk in Sioux, gesturing toward the bodies. "Of Reed and Ellis," Swift Elk replied, his tone weary but firm. Whatever he said caused Black Wolf to glance at Sarah, a new expression crossing his face. Not quite respect, but no longer outright hostility. With surprising gentleness, Swift Elk helped Sarah to her feet. "It is over," he said simply. She looked around at the aftermath of violence. Bodies scattered across ground that had stood peaceful for centuries before their arrival, blood soaking into ancient stone, the acrid smell of gunpowder hanging in the air. So much death, stretching back to Blackwater Pass and beyond. "Is it?" she asked, her voice a painful rasp. "Will it ever be truly over?" Swift Elk's hand found hers, his calloused palm warm against her skin. For Reed, for Ellis, for Matthews, yes. Their story ends here. His dark eyes met hers. "For you, for me, this is not ending. This is the beginning." Sarah looked down at their joined hands, so different in color and size, yet fitted together as though made for each other. Then she raised her gaze to his face, seeing beyond the stern warrior to the man beneath, the man who had saved her life multiple times, who had respected her choices, who had shown her compassion when she expected none. "A beginning," she repeated, softly, allowing herself to believe it might be true. Around them, the Medicine Rocks stood silent witness, ancient guardians of a story not yet fully written, a story of unlikely allies, of enemies turned protectors, of a young woman who had lost everything only to find herself anew in the most unexpected of places. The sun climbed higher in the Dakota sky, warming the blood-stained earth beneath their feet, promising that even after the darkest night, dawn would come again. The aftermath of battle cast a solemn pall over Medicine Rocks. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the ancient stone formations, the Sioux warriors prepared their dead for the journey to ancestral grounds. 2 of Swift Elk's men had fallen in the fighting: Stone Knife, a middle-aged hunter with 5 children waiting at Wolf Creek, and Cloud Runner, barely 20 summers old, on his first war party. Sarah helped Singing Bird tend to the wounded, moving among injured warriors with water and bandages torn from her ruined dress. Her throat still ached where Ellis had tried to strangle her, purple bruises forming like a necklace of violence around her neck. Yet compared to what others had suffered, her injuries seemed insignificant. Swift Elk's wound concerned her most, a deep slash across his chest from Matthew's knife that continued to seep blood despite Singing Bird's poultices. He refused to rest, moving among his men, speaking words of encouragement, helping prepare the dead with solemn dignity. Only the tightness around his eyes betrayed the pain he endured. Black Wolf supervised the disposal of their enemies' bodies, ordering them dragged to a ravine some distance from the sacred rocks. No burial, no ceremony, just the harsh justice of the plains, leaving them for the scavengers. Sarah couldn't bring herself to feel pity for Reed, Matthews, or Ellis. Whatever humanity they might once have possessed had been consumed by greed and hatred long before their deaths. As twilight approached, she found herself standing before the bodies of her family's killers one last time. Ellis's face was slack in death, all trace of the charming guide who had won her father's trust erased by the final grimace of pain. Reed stared sightlessly at the darkening sky, his weathered features relaxed into an expression almost resembling peace. Matthews lay apart from the others, his broken body a testament to Swift Elk's determination to protect her. "They cannot hurt you now," came a voice behind her. Sarah turned to find Black Wolf standing a few paces away, his stern face impassive. As he studied her, it was the first time he had addressed her directly. "I know," she replied, her voice still raspy from Ellis's assault. Black Wolf nodded toward the bodies. "These men, they died because they wanted what was not theirs. Gold, land." His dark eyes met hers. "You." "I never belonged to them," Sarah said, a new firmness in her tone. "No," Black Wolf agreed, surprising her. "You belong to yourself. This is why Swift Elk respected you from the beginning." He glanced toward where the chief's son was helping load the bodies of their fallen onto travois. "Why, I did not." The admission hung between them. unexpected and profound. Sarah waited, sensing there was more the proud warrior needed to say. "I lost my wife, children to white man's disease," Black Wolf continued after a moment, confirming what Swift Elk had told her. Hatred filled the empty space they left behind. His gaze returned to the bodies in the ravine. "But hatred is a poor companion on a long journey. It keeps you warm at night," Sarah said softly, "but burns you from within." Black Wolf's eyes widened slightly at her understanding. "Yes." He touched the war paint on his cheek, then gestured to the fading marks on her own face. "You fought beside us, bled beside us, against your own kind." "They were not my kind," Sarah replied. "Not anymore." The warrior studied her for a long moment before giving a single sharp nod. Acceptance, if not quite friendship. "Swift Elk says you come to Wolf Creek with us." It wasn't a question, but Sarah answered anyway. "If I'm welcome." "You survived when others did not," Black Wolf said, as if this explained everything. "The Great Spirit has a purpose for you." With that cryptic statement, he turned and walked away, leaving Sarah to ponder his words. By the time she returned to the main encampment, preparations for departure were nearly complete. The wounded had been secured on travois, hitched to patient horses. The dead were wrapped in their finest blankets, faces painted for their journey to the spirit world. Supplies salvaged from the battle had been distributed among the warriors. Singing, Bird sat by a small fire, grinding herbs in a stone mortar. The old woman looked up as Sarah approached, her weathered face creasing into a knowing smile. "Sit," she commanded, patting the ground beside her. "Need to prepare you." "Prepare me?" Sarah asked, sinking down onto the offered spot. "For what?" "Journey, of course." Singing Bird mixed her crushed herbs with something from a small clay pot, creating a fragrant paste. "Wolf Creek Camp is a 3-day ride. Many will question white women among Sioux." Her gnarled fingers reached up to touch the bruises on Sarah's neck. "Must show them you are not the enemy, not a prisoner, are honored guests of the chief's son." With surprising gentleness, the old woman began applying the paste to Sarah's bruises. It tingled against her skin, the scent of sage and something sweeter filling her nostrils. "This will heal?" Sarah asked. Singing Bird cackled. "Heal body, yes. Also mark you as under protection of a medicine woman." She continued her work, humming softly. "Some wounds take longer to heal than others. Some never heal completely." Sarah knew the old woman wasn't speaking only of physical injuries. The massacre at Blackwater Pass had left scars far deeper than flesh could sustain, wounds of the spirit that might never fully close. "How do you bear it?" she asked quietly. "The loss?" Singing Bird's hands paused, her dark eyes growing distant. "With memory. When I was a young woman before Swift Elk's mother was born, blue coats came to our winter camp. Many died. My parents, first husband, infant son." Her voice remained steady, though the pain of decades-old grief still echoed beneath the words. "I wanted to die too, walked into a blizzard to join them in the spirit world." "What happened?" "Heavy. Shield's father found me, brought me back. Said Great Spirit not finished with me yet." A smile touched her wrinkled lips. He was right. Had a daughter who became mother to Swift Elk, became medicine woman, found purpose beyond grief. "And the pain?" Sarah pressed. "Does it ever go away?" "No," Singing Bird answered honestly, "but it grows quieter with time, like distant thunder instead of storm overhead." She finished applying the medicine, sitting back to examine her work. "You will find a new purpose too, Water Woman. Already beginning." Before Sarah could ask what she meant, Swift Elk approached. His wound now properly bandaged, his expression solemn but resolved. "We must leave before full dark," he said. "Journey to Wolf Creek is long." Singing Bird rose with surprising agility for one so old. "She is ready," the medicine woman announced, gathering her supplies, body and spirit. Swift Elk's gaze lingered on the medicine applied to Sarah's bruises, a flash of anger crossing his features before he mastered it. "My horse is prepared for 2 riders," he told her, "if you still wish to come with us." Though phrased as a choice, Sarah heard the question beneath his words. Was she certain she wanted to leave behind the world she knew, to journey into a future filled with unknowns? "I have nothing to go back to," she said simply, "and everything to go forward for." Something shifted in Swift Elk's expression, relief perhaps, or a deeper emotion he wasn't yet ready to name. He offered his hand to help her rise, the simple gesture bridging the vastly different worlds from which they came. As the Sioux party prepared to depart Medicine Rocks, Sarah found herself drawn to the cave one last time. The ancient paintings seemed to watch her as she moved through the chambers, their earthy pigments glowing softly in the fading light. Generations of stories etched in stone, hunts and battles, visions and ceremonies, the continuous flow of a people moving through time, adding your story to theirs, Swift Elk said, appearing silently beside her. Sarah touched a painting of a buffalo hunt, feeling the textured surface beneath her fingertips. "Will I have a place among your people?" she asked, giving voice to the question that had troubled her since Black Wolf's unexpected overture of acceptance. "Path will not be easy," Swift Elk admitted. "Some will welcome you. Others will fear what your presence means." He gestured toward the cave entrance, where twilight had deepened to true night. "World is changing. Lines between our peoples shift like sand in the wind." "And us?" Sarah asked, finally addressing what had grown between them since that first chaotic meeting at Blue Hollow. "Where do we stand in this changing world?" Swift Elk was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful as he considered her question. "When I first saw you at an outlaw camp," he began, "I saw only white woman who needed saving. Now I see Sarah." The simple statement carried a weight that settled in her chest, warm and unfamiliar. "And what does Sarah mean to Swift Elk?" she pressed, needing clarity after so much uncertainty. Instead of answering immediately, he reached out, his fingers brushing a strand of hair from her face with unexpected tenderness. "In my language, there is a word, takue, means purpose, reason for being." His dark eyes held hers in the dim light. "Perhaps the Great Spirit placed us on the same path for reasons beyond understanding." It wasn't a declaration of love. They had known each other barely 2 days after all, but it held a promise of possibility that made Sarah's heart beat faster. "Takue," she repeated, testing the word on her tongue. "I like that." A call from outside broke the moment, Little Hawk announcing that all was ready for departure. Swift Elk offered his hand once more, and Sarah took it without hesitation. Together, they exited the cave, emerging into a night brilliant with stars. The Sioux party moved out from Medicine Rocks in a solemn procession, the dead and wounded in the center, warriors flanking them on all sides. Sarah rode behind Swift Elk, on his paint stallion, her arms encircling his waist as they navigated the darkness. Despite her exhaustion, despite the aches of battle and the uncertainty of the future, she felt a strange peace settling over her. They rode through the night and into the dawn, stopping only briefly to rest the horses and tend to the wounded. By midday, they had left the territory of the Medicine Rocks far behind, traveling through rolling grasslands, punctuated by stands of cottonwood trees. The land grew more verdant as they followed a winding creek westward, wildlife abundant despite the approach of autumn. On the evening of the second day, they made camp in a sheltered valley. The mood among the warriors had lightened somewhat, the immediate grief of losing companions giving way to the quiet pride of victory and justice served. Even Black Wolf seemed less stern, sharing stories around the fire that made the younger Warriors laughed despite their fatigue. Sarah sat slightly apart, watching the interactions with fascination. Though she couldn't understand the words, the universal language of camaraderie transcended the barrier of speech. Singing Bird joined her, offering a wooden bowl of stew that smelled of sage and rabbit. "You watch like a hawk," the old woman observed. Learning. Sarah accepted the food gratefully. "There's much I don't understand. Understanding comes with time," Singing Bird replied, settling beside her with a contented sigh. "Like learning a new language. First words, then meanings, then spirit beneath." As they ate, Sarah noticed Little Hawk approaching, his young face solemn with purpose. He carried something wrapped in a piece of soft deerskin, which he presented to her with formal dignity. "For you," he said in his careful English. "From Black Wolf." Surprised, Sarah accepted the bundle, unwrapping it slowly. Inside lay a knife, not a small blade like Maggie had given her, but a proper hunting knife with a bone handle and a sheath decorated with intricate beadwork. "To replace one you lost in battle," Little Hawk explained. "Black Wolf says warriors needs proper weapons." The gift rendered her momentarily speechless. Coming from the man who had most opposed her presence among them, it represented an acknowledgement. She hadn't expected acceptance, however grudging, of her place among their band. "Thank him for me," she said finally, running her fingers over the craftsmanship of the blade. "Tell him I will carry it with honor." Little Hawk nodded, seemingly pleased with her response. "He also says you must learn to use it properly. No more hitting heads with rocks." A grin flashed across his young face, though that worked well enough on Matthews. The mention of the outlaw's name brought a flood of memories. His cruelty at Blue Hollow, the mockery of a wedding ceremony, his hands around her throat. Yet the fear that had accompanied those memories had diminished, replaced by the knowledge that he could never hurt her or anyone else again. "Yes," she agreed, matching Little Hawk's smile with one of her own. "But a knife is certainly more reliable." Later, as the camp settled for the night, Swift Elk found her sitting beside the dying fire, still examining Black Wolf's gift. He lowered himself beside her, moving carefully to avoid aggravating his healing wound. "A worthy gift," he remarked, nodding toward the knife. "Black Wolf's own work. He is the finest blade maker among Hunkpapa." "It's beautiful," Sarah said, "but I'm not sure I've earned such a gesture." Swift Elk's expression grew serious. "You fought beside us, faced death with courage, helped defeat those who would harm my people." He touched the handle of the knife gently. "In this way, Black Wolf acknowledges this." Sarah sheathed the blade, setting it aside as she turned to face Swift Elk fully. In the firelight, his features seemed both stronger and gentler than they had when she first saw him. The warrior and, the man in perfect balance. "What happens when we reach Wolf Creek?" she asked, the question that had lingered in her mind throughout their journey. "My father will welcome you as an honored guest," Swift Elk replied. "Beyond that," he looked up at the star-filled sky. "Future is an unwritten path." "I have no illusions," Sarah said quietly. "I know I'll always be an outsider in some ways." Swift Elk considered this, his expression thoughtful. "Perhaps. Or perhaps you will find a new place between worlds." He turned to her, something like hope glimmering in his dark eyes. "Bridge, not barrier." The concept resonated within her, not fully belonging to either world, yet connected to both in ways that might someday prove valuable. Not just a survivor of tragedy, but a creator of something new. "I would like that," she said softly. They sat in companionable silence as the fire burned down to embers, the sounds of the sleeping camp a gentle backdrop to their shared solitude. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new adjustments, the first steps into a future neither could fully envision. Yet for this moment, beneath the vast canopy of stars, they had found a rare peace. Two souls from different worlds, drawn together, By violence, but bound by something far stronger, dawn broke on the third day, with a glory of color that painted the western horizon in shades of gold and crimson. The Sioux camp stirred to life, the final preparations made for the journey to Wolf Creek. Sarah helped Singing Bird tend to the wounded one last time before mounting behind Swift Elk for what would be the final leg of their journey. As they crested a hill around midday, Swift Elk reined his horse to a halt, gesturing toward the valley that opened below them. Sarah gasped at the sight. A large encampment spread along the banks of a winding creek, dozens of teepees arranged in a great circle, smoke rising from cooking fires, horses grazing in meadows of tall grass. Children played between dwellings. Women worked at tanning racks. Men gathered in council near a central fire. "Wolf Creek," Swift Elk announced, pride evident in his voice. "My father's camp." The approaching war party was spotted quickly. Cries went up from the camp, and riders galloped out to meet them. Swift Elk raised his arm in greeting, calling out in Sioux. Word of their arrival spread rapidly, and by the time they reached the outskirts of the camp, a large crowd had gathered to welcome the returning warriors. The atmosphere changed perceptibly when Sarah was noticed. Whispers spreading through the crowd, expressions ranging from curiosity to suspicion to outright hostility. She sat straighter behind Swift Elk, determined to face whatever reception awaited her with dignity. A tall, imposing figure stepped forward from the gathering, an older man whose bearing immediately marked him as someone of great importance. Though his hair showed streaks of grey and his face bore the lines of many winters, his eyes remained sharp and commanding. The eagle feather in his hair matched the one Swift Elk wore, confirming his identity even before he spoke. "Father," Swift Elk greeted him, dismounting and approaching with respect. "We return with news of victory. The murderers of our people have been defeated." Chief Heavyshield embraced his son briefly before his gaze settled on Sarah, still seated atop the paint. "Stallion?" His expression revealed nothing of his thoughts as he studied the white woman in the torn blue dress, with Singing Bird's medicine on her bruises and Black Wolf's knife at her belt. "And who is this you bring to our camp?" he asked, though something in his tone suggested he already knew at least part of the answer. Swift Elk turned, extending his hand to help Sarah dismount. She stood beside him, acutely aware of hundreds of eyes upon her, judging, questioning, wondering. "This is Sarah Holloway," Swift Elk announced, his voice carrying to all who had gathered. "Survivor of the Wagon Massacre at Blackwater Pass, captive of Reed's Outlaws, warrior who fought beside us against our enemies." He paused, his next words chosen with deliberate care. "And my friend, who I have invited to our camp as an honored guest." A murmur passed through the crowd at this declaration. Sarah felt the weight of expectation bearing down upon her, the future hanging in balance as Chief Heavyshield considered his son's words. After what seemed an eternity, the chief spoke. "The Hunk Papa remembers both friends and enemies," he said, his voice deep and measured. "Those who stand with us in battle are welcome at our fires." He extended his hand to Sarah in the white man's custom of greeting. "Sarah Holloway, my son speaks well of you. Wolf Creek offers you shelter for as long as you wish to stay." Relief flooded through her as she clasped his hand. "Thank you, Chief Heavyshield. I am honored by your welcome." The tension broke. The crowd dispersing as preparations began for the rituals that would honor the returning warriors and mourn those who would not return. Sarah found herself guided to a teepee prepared by Singing Bird, given fresh clothing to replace her ruined dress, offered food and water after the long journey. That evening, as the camp gathered for the solemn ceremony of remembrance, Sarah sat beside Singing Bird, watching as Swift Elk recounted the tale of their battle at Medicine Rocks. Though she couldn't understand his words, she recognized when he spoke of her role, the way heads turned in her direction, expressions of surprise or newfound respect appearing on many faces. Later, as the night deepened and most of the camp had retired, Sarah found a moment of solitude near the creek that gave the settlement its name. The water gurgled softly over smooth stones, reflecting starlight like scattered diamonds. Behind her, the campfires burned low, the sounds of celebration giving way to peaceful slumber. Footsteps approached. Swift elk, his silhouette unmistakable. In the moonlight, he carried something in his hands, which he presented to her as he drew near. "For you," he said, "to replace what was lost." Sarah unfolded the bundle to find a journal bound in soft leather, a pencil tucked into a loop at its side. The simple gift brought unexpected tears to her eyes, a recognition of who she had been and who she might become. "How did you know?" she asked, touching the blank pages reverently. "I saw you watching the paintings in the cave," he explained. "Understood you are the keeper of stories, like our memory keepers who paint on stone and hide." He gestured toward the journal. "Your stories should not be lost." Sarah opened to the first page, running her fingers across its empty expanse. So much had happened, so much had changed. Where would she even begin? "I don't know if I can find the right words," she admitted. Swift Elk's expression softened in the moonlight. "Words will come, like a river finding a path through mountains. Cannot be rushed." She looked up at him, this man who had saved her life in more ways than one, not just from death, but from the despair that had threatened to consume her after losing everything. "Thank you," she said simply. "For everything." He nodded, understanding all she left unspoken. They stood together beneath the vast Dakota sky, the creek murmuring beside them, the future stretching before them like an unwritten page, full of challenges certainly, but also possibilities. Neither could have imagined, when fate first drew their paths together, Sarah Holloway, sole survivor of the Blackwater Pass massacre, had found something she thought forever lost the day her family fell to Outlaws' bullets. She had found home, not in a place, but in the space between words, in the courage to begin again, in the strength to forge a new path, and in the heart of a Sioux warrior who had seen beyond the color of her skin to the spirit that refused to be broken. Her story, once defined by tragedy, had transformed into something else entirely. Not an ending, but a beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.